TCU will win the New Mexico Bowl. I'll tell you why next here on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. TCU, Louisiana, and the New Mexico Bowl tomorrow afternoon at 1:15. Frogs eyeing a Washington cornerback, Elijah Jackson, the transfer portal. We'll get into that later. We'll also give you my prediction for the game tomorrow. But we start with the keys to the game against the Ragin Cajuns. And if you're wondering, who is this team? What will TCU be facing tomorrow afternoon? Here's just sort of a brief rundown of what Louisiana is and what they have at their disposal currently. So Ben Woolridge is their starting quarterback, and he was a Sun Belt Player of the Year, had a really nice season from a stats perspective, 2,392 yards, 17 touchdowns, 5 picks. He's missed the last 3 games with an injury, and he also missed the Sun Belt Championship game. So Louisiana finished the year 9-3. They lost 2 games in the regular season. They fell to South Alabama and Tulane, and then they were in first place in the Sun Belt going into that title game, but Ben Woolridge was unavailable. And then Chandler Fields, their backup, also got hurt. So they were down to a third-string quarterback in Daniel Beal. So their coach, Mike Desmo, he said yesterday that Ben should be good to play, and he's probable for Saturday's bowl game. And that's pretty significant news, because if they were down to a third-string quarterback and a true freshman, even though he's had plenty of time to prepare, so has Andy Avalos, that wasn't a good situation for them. This makes a big difference in how competitive this game could be, and ultimately if Louisiana can pull off an upset. But as it stands, he looks like he's going to be their guy. And he had a really good season. I mean, threw prolific yards, touchdowns, made good decisions, didn't throw a lot of picks, only 5 INTs throughout the year. They had a big win against Wake Forest in non-conference play, and they scored 41 points in that ball game, and he was throwing strikes all over the field. They use a lot of motion. They use a lot of play action. They have a good running game, which helps as well. And that's really what they've hung their hat on all season long. But that being said, Woolridge was the Sun Belt Offensive Player of the Year for a reason. He put up great numbers, led that team to a lot of victories, and did a really good job throwing the ball all over the yard. More of your prototypical pocket passer, hasn't put up a ton of rushing yards, but they use the RPO game, the zone read stuff effectively. So he's not a complete statue out there. And they'll roll him out, move the formation around. He's not totally inept at mobility. It's just he's probably not going to tuck the ball and run for 60 yards down the football field in that sense. But he's a good QB, and he should be available for tomorrow's game. They have had a couple guys move on in the transfer portal, most notably Terrence Carter, tight end. He had 689 yards receiving. Also Harvey Broussard, who had almost 500 yards receiving and was their second leading receiver, with Terrence Carter being a tight end. But they still have Lance Lejeune, who was their leading receiver with 814 yards receiving this past season. And they got a really good running game. Bill Davis has run for about 800 yards and about 5 yards per carry. Zylan Perry, 646 yards, 6.5 yards per carry. As a team, they've rushed for 5 yards a carry. They're very big up front when you watch them. For a group of 5 team, they have a big physical offensive line. They get going downhill, and they run the ball well. So the keys for this ball game, as far as TCU winning, I think the first one is I sort of ran down a lot of the offensive stats. Defensively, they're not totally lost, but when they've played really stout competition this year, gave up 33 points to Tulane, gave up 41 points to Wake Forest, or 33 points to Wake Forest as well. So they've struggled at times in stopping big-time opponents. They've struggled against the run. This should be a ball game where TCU's physicality stands out. And that's not something that we've said a lot this year. But as the season's gone on, offensive line has gotten better. I think this is going to be a big game for TCU in trying to establish a run game without Savion Williams. What does that look like? And now you have the added wrinkle of not having Haas Haney available. So can you run the ball in the traditional fashion with Jeremy Payne at your disposal? Kendall Briles said that Nate Palmer is going to be a factor in this ball game as well, running the ball. He's going to get opportunities and get chances to solidify himself as someone who can be in this rotation next year. So Nate Palmer's there. Jeremy Payne's there. Ryan Hughes, Ben Taylor Whitfield, can they do a good job in the run game of moving, the line of scrimmage, reestablishing it, getting guys moved down the field, getting that, that head on the outside shoulder, flipping guys, hook blocks, those types of things to give running lanes for these running backs. That's the first key. I feel like Josh Hoover is going to do what he's done all season, and in the second half of the season, what he's done really well, along with throwing for a lot of yards and keeping this team on schedule, is not turning the ball over. You have the issue of you're shorthanded at wide receiver this week. Savion Williams and Jack Best are not going to play, but great chance for Eric McAllister to step up and show that he can be a number one option in the ball game. J.P. Richardson will be playing, and he's been as consistent as anybody the last 2 years at that slot spot. As far as your young guys go, throw a bunch of dudes out there, see who pops, right? Jordan Bailey has made some really good things happen, has made some explosive plays happen. Give him opportunities. Give Jakyle Baker and Ezukama and Braylon James opportunities on the outside and let them go make plays. Throw some 50-50 balls up there. Let them go up and show you that they can win these individual battles and these one-on-one matchups, because that's going to be the springboard that takes you into the offense this upcoming season. So running the ball, establishing that run game, staying ahead of the chains, big key for this one. And then secondly, this is not something that's really measurable, but how focused are you? Right? I mean, TCU has talked about the fact that they're excited about this. It's a chance to go play. It's a chance to end your season with 9 wins. I know the fans are not stoked about it. I get it. But for the team itself, I think the motivation should be there. They've won 5 out of the last 6. They've got a chance to close the season with a victory, take some momentum into the offseason. There's a lot of good vibes around this program right now. Do you wish you were in the Liberty Bowl against Arkansas? Sure. Do you wish you were maybe at the Guaranteed Rate Bowl against a Big Ten team like Rutgers? That'd be great. But this is your chance to go play. And Louisiana is not a bad team. And I don't want to make it sound like this is a ball game where TCU should just go in there and roll. Like, you watch them, that Marshall game really doesn't tell you anything about who this Ragin' Cajuns group is. That was personnel issues at quarterback. That's largely going to be solved. I don't know how effective Ben will be, but he's healthy enough to play, and that makes a huge difference. Yes, they've had an exodus at the portal, but that hurts their depth. I think their starters should hold up pretty well in some areas. So you can't just waltz in there and expect to get a victory. And yes, I think the most important thing for this ball game, and really the last 3 weeks of practices that they've had, is seeing what you got for next year, getting your young players involved, establishing and continuing to solidify a culture of success and accountability going into the offseason. But when the game starts, let's be competitive and let's go win the ball game, right? Yes, you're missing 2 star wide receivers, but that's really it as far as opt-outs go. I mean, everywhere else you're pretty healthy. If you are shorthanded, it's issues that you come in dealing with off and on all year. So it's not something that's foreign to this coaching staff, and they should be ramped up and ready to go. And then finally, I think on the defensive side of things, Louisiana's run the ball really well. And you don't know what Wooldridge's health level is. Although he's been very good this year, force them into uncomfortable situations, make him beat you by throwing the football. He's got some new wide receivers out there, some new playmakers that haven't had a lot of opportunities. What's that chemistry going to be like? What's that timing going to be like? Get pressure on the quarterback, which is something that's been very inconsistent for TCU this year. There have been games where they've had it. You go back, it seems like about 12 months ago now, but you go back to like the Stanford game, you saw that nastiness, that intensity, that pressure defense, and then it kind of waned for 3 or 4 weeks. It's sort of picked up in spurts and bursts ever since, but it hasn't been that baseline level that you want it to be. So, great chance. I said this yesterday. Throw Jonathan Backs out there. Let him go make some plays. Let him see if he can use that speed and that athleticism to get around the edge and make something happen. These young defensive linemen that are the foundation of your program moving forward, Marcus Deal, Travis Jackson, Paul Olawale won't play tomorrow, but he's going to be one of those guys that is a key next year. They have to be the foundation for this defense in 2025. So what do you have at your disposal moving forward, and how can they be effective in this ball game, pressuring the quarterback, making things uncomfortable for the Ragin' Cajuns offense, and slowing down that run game and that passing attack? Also, you've got two coordinators who are well respected around the country. They've had a lot of time to prepare for this ball game. What do they have up their sleeve? Like, what does Kendall Briles do when he's got 3 weeks to prepare? Because hopefully next year you're looking at a situation where you're possibly playing for a playoff if you can win the Big 12. That's the aspiration. I'm not saying that's going to happen. That's what you want. So when you've got that type of break, what do these two guys cook up? What does Andy Avalos see on tape that he says, okay, I can figure this out? Without Savion, what does Kendall see from this offense that he thinks we can replicate this, we can have success with it, and we can do it over and over again until they find a way to stop it? When we come back, predictions, and I'll tell you why. Yes, it's a bowl game. It's going to be probably a sleepy atmosphere at 1:15 in the afternoon tomorrow, but this is an important game for this program because it would close out 6 or 7 weeks now of showing maybe they've turned the corner in some ways from an accountability and culture standpoint. We'll break that down next year on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where the game starts. Go to FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. You place one $5 bet. You win that bet. You get up to $250 in bonus bets. FanDuel. They make it simple for you. NFL games ending, regular season coming to an end here. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. Again, if you've ever wondered, should I dip into this? Should I find a way to take this on for the first time? Go to FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. You place one $5 bet. You get up to $250 in bonus bets just in time for the NFL playoffs, which are coming up. But close the NFL regular season strong with FanDuel. Again, one $5 bet, get you $250 in bonus bets. FanDuel, it's where the game starts. We will have a post-game show after this ball game. Now, it will most likely be Saturday night or early Sunday morning that I get it recorded and get it out there, but I'll have a breakdown of what happens, who showed up, who didn't, what this team looks like, and unfortunately, that'll be all the TCU football for the rest of this year. I'm already sad about it, man. I just love getting to react to these games and watch these games on a weekly basis. I've appreciated y'all's input as I have gone through the show this season. But, yeah, one more opportunity to end the season with a win against Louisiana. I think they're going to win tomorrow. I feel like they get a victory. And, yes, it's going to be a tough game in some ways because you're missing some talented players. You've got to play with a group that is a little inexperienced. But Louisiana's in the same boat. I mentioned, they have some star players either in the transfer portal or that are injured and won't be able to suit up for this ball game. In the end, I just believe TCU's talent advantage and their depth will be the difference in this game. I think especially when TCU's offense is facing Louisiana defense, they should be able to score points. And with this much time to kind of recollect themselves, they were humming in the second half of the year. Cincinnati game was standing, which a lot of that was issues with the weather. Yeah, they got to get that fixed. They need a more dynamic running game because when they couldn't air it out in the snow in the regular season finale, that was very problematic. But to their credit, defense stepped up and they found a way to slug through that ball game and win it. But good conditions, a lot of time to scheme things up, I think is going to work in TCU's advantage. And even with the guys that have opted out at wideout. I just feel like these wide receivers and their athleticism against this Louisiana secondary, plus the added bonus of the Cajuns struggle to stop the run. And that's an area where TCU's had a bunch of inconsistency, but if they can establish somewhat of a running game, then that'll be, step up from what they've dealt with for most of the year. That will be the difference in this ball game. They get the victory. According to FanDuel, Frogs 11.5-point favorites. I think TCU wins. I think TCU covers. I feel like it'll be a close game in the first half, but ultimately Frogs win by a couple scores. And they finish the season with 9 wins. And, it's not going to be something that people outside of TCU circles really remember. But for this team individually, and when you look at it as they go into the offseason, I do think closing the season 6-1 is a big deal. And it shows really for the first time in a year and a half, the complaints I had about Sonny Dykes and his coaching style and what the product that he was putting out on a week-to-week basis. Just sloppy play, turning the ball over way too much, way too many penalties, beating themselves on a regular basis. I mean, you look at this season, and I said this after the regular season ended. The losses to UCF and Houston were bad. But at the same time, I felt like it was sort of necessary. I wish it wasn't this way. I wish they could have learned. I wish they could have found a way to win those games and they could have still learned these lessons. But it felt like it was necessary for this team to turn the corner and say, okay, we have to make some changes, personnel-wise, scheme-wise, but just as a team, we have to be more accountable to the fundamental part of the ball game. We can't keep losing the turnover margin. We can't keep hurting ourselves with critical penalties. We have to fix some of these things and turn these mental errors around. And they did that. So you have to be self-motivated for tomorrow's game. It's probably not going to be an electric atmosphere. It's not everybody's first choice. But you know what? It's what's in front of you. And after the last 2 years, I don't think we can be picky and choosy about it. Just to be real. We're not that far removed from a college ball playoff appearance and a victory, which is awesome. But they also went 5-7 this past season. And they righted the ship this year, but they were 3-3 going into that bye week. And I think nationally, a lot of people sort of checked out and said, okay, I don't really know what's going on there. But TCU removed itself from Big 12 title contention and all those things. And they're paying the price for it to a certain degree. But if this team has really turned a culture from a mental toughness standpoint, an accountability standpoint, taking care of each other, making sure everybody's on the same page, then they'll show it with how motivated and fired up they are to play tomorrow. And if they show you that they can do that and they cruise to a victory, then I feel optimistic about what this team could be next season. You've got to build a roster you've got to continue to build this roster in a way that makes sense and that fixes some of the ills of this past year. I do believe, though, for the first time since that opening season in the Sonny Dykes era, there's a solid foundation for what they want to be. And you've seen a dynamic passing attack the last couple of years, very talented skill players. I think a defense in year one under Andy Avalos that progressed and got better as the year went on and is hopefully ready to take another step going in next season. If you're able to return a dude like Bud Clark, who's been around forever, that's a big win for you. You get Jamel Johnson back in the transfer portal. Yes, you lost James Brockermeyer. That's rough. You lost Haas Haney. That's rough. And I'm not naive. Probably a good chance that there's one or two more guys after this bowl game that decide to go that you're like, man, I wish we could have kept this person around. That attrition can derail things to a certain extent. But as long as it's not, key trench players or a dude like Eric McAllister that you're really banking on next season being the person that steps up in a big way, then there's a solid foundation here for success going into 2025. But the first step is you got to take care of your business in this ball game and lock in and win. And so What does that look like for TCU? Can they do that? I think this will tell us a lot about who this team is, and I believe in them. I believe that they have made the necessary changes to be focused and ready. It's up to them to prove me right, though. When we come back, speaking of building that, roster for next year, what is TCU doing in the transfer portal? What is the potential next commit? We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. You ever open up your bank account and you say to yourself, where did my money go? I feel like I do that almost every time. I'm like, wait, I thought I was going to have this much in here. Now I only have this much in checking. What payment is it? And typically you look and you're like, oh gosh, I forgot to cancel this. I forgot to cancel it again. The subscription, this $15 subscription, this $25 subscription that I've just had sitting here for months, and I keep forgetting to delete it, or maybe you don't even know about it. Rocket Money is an app to get. It's a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions. It helps monitor your spending and lower your bills so you can enjoy your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your own spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Over 5 million users have saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. If you missed yesterday's show, or if you just need a refresher, want to hear a refresher, the next sort of target in the portal that I think could be committing soon, Jeremy Clark reported that Elijah Jackson, corner from Washington, visited with TCU about a week ago. And Elijah was a starter on that Washington team under Kalen DeBoer that went to the national title game. He had a pass breakup, the key pass breakup at the end of the ball game against Texas, when Quinn Ewers was trying to find Adonai Mitchell in the corner of the end zone to win that ball game. And he knocked it down and sent UW to the title game, and didn't have any interceptions in his career. But that 2023 season had 63 total tackles, 49 solo tackles. I mean, he played a ton of snaps. He was one of their dudes. Now, this past year sort of fell out of favor with the new coaching staff and ended up not being a starter for a lot of the season. Still played on special teams, had 14 tackles total. I reached out to Roman from Locked On Huskies, the Washington podcast, and he told me that Elijah's got good talent. He's a great dude from all accounts, but the simple fact was there were some other young players that were more physical in the run game and that also had potentially brighter NFL futures, and they sort of passed him up on the depth chart. So to me, what this is, if they land him, this gives you some more insurance at corner. Avery Helms coming back from injury. So is Vernon Glover. Those are two guys that you expect to contribute, but what will their contributions look like coming off, non-contact knee injuries that ended their seasons before they even started? That's a huge question mark. I think Javon McIvor showed some really good things in certain spots, but it's a very small sample size. Channing Canada seemed to improve as the year went on. This gives you extra depth. It's another player on the team in that room that should be able to pick up the defense quickly, understand what his responsibilities are, and can compete for a starting job. I mean, honestly, can push other players and say, you know what, I'm a former starter. I don't think TCU sold him on you're going to be a rotational guy. I feel like this is, hey, we've got some openings here. If you go into next year with Avery Helm as a starter on one side, and you have competition on the other, there's Elijah Jackson, McIvor, Glover, and then you have whoever loses out on that job, you have those dudes behind those players, along with Channing Canada, to give you some depth, give them some breaks, give you a different look at times against wide receivers. And that's pretty good room. If I were TCU, I think they need to add one more corner and maybe someone who's a more ready-made starter. But this seems like a good inquiry by them. Okay, you got a guy that it didn't work out at his last spot. Let's give him a change of pace, change of scenery. and see if that production can translate to this team. So that's the name to watch. Post-game show tomorrow night. Games at 1:15. We'll see the Frogs hopefully get to 9 wins, and we'll talk about it more on Saturday and Monday. It's Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.